Okay, excellent. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this early Monday morning. And that's when you're a truly devoted fan, right? When you're willing to get up early on a Monday morning to talk about some Latin. But thank you so much for being here. So, as Joe so kindly said, I am the lead author on the Latin Alive series, which is what we're primarily going to be talking about. I did also, or I was also the lead author on the Libellus de Historia series, the readers for grammar school for 3rd through 5th grade, which was just so much fun to write. And then the Classical U course. If you're interested in Classical U, I know Jesse Hake will be doing a session on it, I believe Friday, but I have a whole session on there for beginning Latin, and it goes through what I used to do in the summer, which was a training course for teachers and parents on teaching the elementary, the grammar school grades, what would be the accompanying of Latin for children, grades 3 through 5, which Dr. Perrin will be talking about this afternoon. So, but today I'm going to focus on the Latin Alive series, and I'd like to start by just kind of giving you an overview of what was the inspiration behind this series. There are a number of good Latin series out there for middle school students and high school students, so why this one? Well, having worked with Dr. Perrin to create the Libellus de Historia series and watching Latin for Children grow, I was not an author on Latin for Children, but I was a consultant / editor at different times for that series, and I taught it for many years at Grace Academy. And Dr. Perrin approached me one day after I had completed the Libellus de Historia series and said, Karen, we're actually Latin for Children is doing really well. We have a lot of people using it and loving it, and they would like to know where to go after this. And not every series is a nice fit because the approach might be different. A lot of people were using Wheelock, which is extremely challenging for middle school students and even for some high school students. You have to remember it was made for a college level, and even the English explanation within the text itself can be very difficult for younger students, particularly the middle school group, to understand. So he saw a need for Classical Academic Press to produce a companion series that would be the next step, a natural fit for Latin for Children, which meant that above all, he wanted it to be something that complemented well classical Christian education. Because after all, that is the methodology, that is the pedagogy that Classical Academic Press is following. And so he came to me with basically most any teacher's dream that says, create your ideal textbook. I will quickly say there's no such thing as a perfect textbook, and I love my series, I use it, but everything has its pros and its cons, depending upon where you are. Everybody has different fits and different needs. But Galen, who was a mentor to me as a young teacher, agreed to partner with me, and the two of us were creating what we thought was the ideal textbook in terms of what are the best things we've noticed in all these other textbooks that he and I had both used. Ginny's, Ecce Romani, the Wheelock series. There's another series called Introduction to Latin by Shelmerdine that was a big influence for me. Even some other ones, Latin for Americans was one, Living Latin was one, but we drew from a number of textbooks that we both thought were excellent to think, what is it that we want to pull? What is it that would set Latin Alive up to be something different and something special? We wanted to keep the parts to whole grammar approach, to build on Latin for Children, to make sure we have that grammar understanding. But we also wanted it to be something that would pull in the oral Latin so that we could have different approaches for different students. Also because, as one of my mentors once told me, the more sense you use to learn something, the better you retain it. So we really wanted to marry those two approaches and provide for both. We also wanted to really focus on a text series that would train students to read authentic Latin literature. So that meant that instead of following the comical adventures of a fictional family, we really wanted to follow the history of Latin itself. So you'll see in book 1, we have stories that are inspired by Livy's history of Rome. And so you go through the Trojan War a little bit in unit 1, all the way through the death of Caesar at the end of that book. The second book picks up with the rise of Augustus, the Pax Romana, and goes on through Attila the Hun at the end. And all of the sources in book 2 are varying. There are varied authors. There is, there is Paterculus, there is Suetonius, there is Tacitus. We also have some adaptations of Ovid and Virgil. We have Tertullian, we have Augustine, we have these later authors as well. And then book 3, you have unadapted text. So by book 3, the students are reading authentic pieces of Latin literature. And that was our goal, was for them to be able to not just learn this classical language, but through this classical language, for them to have access to these primary classical sources that are quite common in the history and literature classes of any classical school. And because we are a Christian organization, we had the freedom to include authors like Tertullian and Augustine, who are neglected in other textbooks. So those were some of the guiding principles in creating this series, and some of the things that I think make it stand out from other series that you might be looking at, such as Wheelock or Henley or Memoria Press. All good curricula, but we wanted to make ours distinctly modeled for a classical Christian education that would train students to read authentic Latin literature. And you see that realized in the 4th book, The Latin Alive Reader, as well, where we have literature from Cicero to Newton. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But that's just kind of an overview. And what I thought I would do in this time that we have together is walk through one of the chapters in the Latin Alive series, book 1. And in that chapter, talk to you about different ways that I approach teaching things. Because as I understand it, we're a group of teachers here, parent teachers, brick and mortar teachers, teachers in different settings, some of us online teachers this year. But we're all approaching this from a teaching standpoint. So I thought we would walk through it. And as Joe said, please do type in your chat questions and we will get to as many as we can at the end. I think this session is allowing us a lot of nice time for that. So let's see here. I'm going to go to my next page. So what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at chapter 7, and I'm going to walk through a chapter lesson plan, but I'm also going to stop to point out some features that are typical. For me as a student, Joe mentioned I started Latin in the 7th grade, and I really did not want to be there. My mother had convinced me I needed to sign up for this class, and so I did, and really wasn't sure that I was going to like it. But I had a marvelous teacher, and she caused me to just fall in love with this language. And one of the things that hooked me was history. I've always loved history. I've loved the stories of history. And so you see a lot of history in this book. Another thing that grasped my attention as a young student was to see how prevalent Latin is still in our modern American society. I think, unfortunately, we have, I shouldn't say we, Latin has begun to be played down as no longer, quote, useful and no longer, quote, relevant. But that's simply not true. And that's actually why Dr. Perrin gave the title of this series Latin Alive, because he saw that I was doing all of these things to show how Latin still lives around us today. Not as a language so much for communication, but it's part of our American fabric. So at the beginning of each one of these chapters, you're going to see a motto, and it is a motto from one of the states in our union. The first chapters opening are actually from the Great Seal of the United States. On the Great Seal of the United States and on your $1 bill, there are actually 3 Latin mottos. One of them is the famous E pluribus unum, one out of many. That is our nation's motto, but there are 2 others as well, so you'll have to go look those up. This one for chapter 7 is Regnat Populus, meaning the people rule. And I really enjoy playing with this motto. I'm enlarging this for all of you. For our students, oftentimes, in fact, I will get a larger image of it and put it up on our whiteboard with our projector so that we can look at it, because not only does it have a Latin motto, but there is a lot of classical imagery in this seal. Not only do we have the iconic American eagle with his olive branches in his right and his arrows in his left claw, but we also have been above him, we have this small figure. It is a woman holding a long pole with a cap on it. I'm afraid I can't get it any bigger than it is, but she has a long pole and she has a cap on top of it. Almost looks like Santa's cap minus a ball of fluff. And in her other hand, her right hand, she holds a victory garland. Well, this right here is Lady Liberty. And this cap is called the Phrygian cap. In the Asia Minor parts, in kind of the Troy area. In fact, a lot of times you'll see statues of Paris, the Prince of Troy, wearing this Phrygian cap. The Phrygian cap was also known as the freedman's cap. It was the sign of a free man, not a slave, a free, full standing citizen. And so for the Romans, they adopted this as a symbol of freedom. And so America did also. And in many of our state seals, it is very popular to see this cap, particularly those that were around during the Revolutionary War, this cap that shows our freedom and our independence. Also, the French Revolution, the symbol of the French Revolution was Marianne, and she was wearing this freedman's cap too. So some of these classical images are woven deeply into the fabric of our culture, our American culture, and it's nice to be able to recognize them. Next, at the beginning of every chapter, I have a vocabulary list. Now, the way that we came up with this vocabulary, I'm often asked about this. The stories are what guided our textbook. The stories are the most important part because we're wanting to teach history and literature at the same time that we're teaching language. So we would decide in what order we wanted to approach grammar lessons. And you'll see it follows a sequence similar to many other books, such as Wheelock, and Henley is a little bit different, but there are some similarities there too. And from that story, we then also drew our vocabulary. So this is particularly designed to introduce vocabulary, review that vocabulary in the exercises, and then see that vocabulary and that grammar in the story. So it's meant to really be some nice, intentional stepping stones towards learning and reinforcing. Within the vocabulary, you will see that on the left, we have the Latin that's full grammatical parts. Then you have the English in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, you have a derivative. This was another important piece to me because as a student myself, derivatives were so very helpful, A, in remembering the vocabulary that I was learning, but also B, in building that bridge between using my Latin to understand and better improve my English. I've had so many students who come out of their Latin studies saying that their English is improved. And that's true, because if you look at it, even though English is a Germanic language, 60% of our vocabulary comes from Latin, 60% of our entire English vocabulary. Now, if I look at words that are just 2 syllables or more, 90% of multisyllabic words are coming from Latin, and they're usually the more elevated words. But I've also found that students don't always make the connection between a Latin word and its English derivative immediately, especially when they're younger. So when I'm introducing vocabulary, I always will pronounce the word first, Deus, Dei, masculine, God. Ask them to mimic me, ask them to repeat it after me. And then I will give a derivative deity. And sometimes I will even ask students, can you think of another one? Because I'm wanting them to establish that connection between Latin and English and also have those mnemonic tools to help remember words. You will see that I do list all the principal parts all the way up front. I'm very much a stickler for having students memorize those principal parts. At the beginning, they're fairly easy. They follow a nice pattern, but as many of you who've studied Latin know, when you get to third conjugation, they're all over the map. So I'm also about instilling good habits for language learning early, because those habits will become very important later, okay? I think it was Aristotle who said, and I'm paraphrasing, that excellence is basically the formation of habit. Excellence is not a virtue. It's the habit formation of habit. It's the result of habit. So we want to establish good habits so we can establish excellence. Okay. One more thing. As I turn the page, you'll see this exercise 1 at the bottom of the vocabulary asks students to mark the syllabication and accent. I have had many questions on this too. Chapter 1 of this book begins with instructions on how to properly mark syllables, accent, and therefore know how to pronounce the words properly. And I have had many a teacher become almost paralyzed by wondering if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And first of all, I would tell everybody to take a deep breath and relax, because even within the US, we do not pronounce words the same. My husband, who was raised in Vermont, and myself, who grew up here in Central Texas, we have several words that we pronounce differently. Guacamole and mountain are some of them. And we are still able to completely understand what each one is saying. So despite your perhaps different dialect in pronouncing Latin, or even whether it's ecclesiastical versus classical, the main thing is to try to be consistent and adhere to it as best you can. I find that doing this exercise, the vocabulary, helps to reinforce that first chapter, but sometimes doing this particular exercise every single chapter might not be the most beneficial. Another thing that I do with my students is the creation of flashcards. And that is very helpful, because not only are they listening to the word, well, within this entire exercise, they're having to write it out, flip it over, write out all the parts. They can play games with them. They can draw pictures with them. But I would just encourage you, whether you do the pronunciation exercise, the flashcard exercise, both, play Pictionary with them, continue to reinforce it, because they need that daily reinforcement in vocabulary. Okay, past the vocabulary section, you will see that the way we have broken down Latin Alive, or organized, I should say, is in these sections. This is something that Susan Shelmerdine did in her book that I really, really liked, because instead of just dumping everything into one chapter, I have it compartmentalized so you can easily decide which sections you want to do in any given day. I usually take about a week to a week and a half per chapter, depending upon what's in the chapter. And I can take a section or two a day, depending upon what's in that section. So in section 21, you see here's the introduction of adjectives. Section 22 then goes on to the agreement between adjectives and nouns. I would do both of those sections in one day. There are other places where one section might just be enough. Within the sections, you then see exercises. So here's exercise 2, where we're asking students to identify stems. And then exercise 3, where we're asking them to translate adjective noun pairs and work on the agreement. So the exercises within a section are specifically supporting that section. And the initial exercise within a chapter are going to be more focused on morphology. That means the inflection of, the changing of words, singular, plural, agreement between nouns and adjectives, agreement between verbs and their subjects, those kind of things. As we progress through the pages, you will then begin to get to sentences. So here we see another parsing exercise for verbs. Down here, we now see how we're applying all the different sections together to go into shorter sentences. So we're kind of going baby steps here, right? The vocabulary, now vocabulary with morphology. How do we change words up to make them work together? Now let's take those concepts, put them in a sentence. We're going a little bit longer here with that. And then the next step, of course, would be our story. So as I mentioned, we are following, inspired by the stories in Livy's Ab Urbe Condita, which are the first 5 books of that work. And here we're talking about Numa Pompilius, the king. A lot of times, too, we like to provide the culture corners, because as I said before, for my own self as a student, the history and the culture of the people who spoke this language is really what hooked me on the language itself in the beginning. And then I just began to appreciate the language itself quite a bit more. So here we're talking about a culture corner, and these are little segments, because it's also very, very hard if you are just a Latin teacher to weave in the history and the culture too. So these culture corner sections, sometimes I give attention to them. Sometimes I'll tell the students as we're reading Numa's story, oh, you should go read the culture corner about this. Sometimes if a student has finished an assignment early, they're doing really well. I'll assign them to go do a culture corner or a derivative detective or one of these bonus sections to give them another profitable thing to do, assignment to do that's supporting their learning and also hopefully captivating their interest. So in this one, we're talking about the toga picta and the shield. These are both items that are mentioned in the story on Numa Pompilius. So we're giving students more information here. We also have the Responde Latine. This is the first segment I want to talk about in terms of our oral questions. So the Responde Latine is something that I've seen in many textbooks. Wheelock uses it, Ecce Romani uses it, many textbooks use it. But we basically have a time for reading comprehension. And reading comprehension is so very important. If you think about it, when you're reading stories in your literature classes, in your reading, writing classes within your school, you're always asking questions. Who's doing the action? What is the action? What's the result of the action? Why? How? Where? When? So we want to do these same things in Latin, partly to continue to build those same reading comprehension skills, partly because this gives us another way to use our language. There's a big debate among classicists and whether we want to do the oral immersion approach or we want to do the, quote, traditional parts to whole grammar-based approach. And my stance is take the middle road because both are important. And in your classroom, you have all sorts of learners. You have learners who are primary visual. You have learners who are primary auditory. You have learners that are tactile. They need to interact. So try all sorts of different methods. Get outside of your own comfort zone. And this is one nice way to do that. So you can assign these as a written assignment. I've done that before. But also take time when you've read the story to ask these questions. And maybe in the beginning, don't ask them to respond in complete sentences, right? If I say quis est numa and somebody raises their hand and says rex, okay, that's great. But if they say numa est rex, even better. So I would encourage you to be as positive as you can, get them going, get them practicing this. As a bit of an anecdotal aside, when I matriculated to the University of Texas at Austin for my classics degree, I also decided I really wanted to study Italian because it was my goal to take students to Italy to see the different places they've been studying about for so many years, which is something, but by God's great blessing, I have been able to do for the past 5 years. Well, I didn't get to do it this year, actually, because Corona happened. But I've done that a number of times. It's been a wonderful experience. As I sat in this Italian class, I found that I picked up the reading and writing extremely quickly. The vocabulary was similar. The language structure was similar, much easier than Latin. But the oral was harder for me. And that's because I did not use a lot of oral practice in my own classrooms. So not only is it going to reinforce your Latin, but it's also a great way to prepare students for that transition to studying a modern language should they want to do so. So I would encourage you to bring in the spoken Latin as much as you can. There are other sections within the book called colloquamur, and we're going to see one of those next. Okay, this colloquamur is giving you terms. Well, hold on one second, two things. First of all, over here on the left side of your screen as you're facing it, you have a culture corner on the Olympians, the 12 Olympians and some other variable deities who are important within the stories they're going through about early Rome. But they're also important in how they connect to our modern American culture, because it is from many of these deities that we get the names of our days of the week. So in this colloquamur, we're bringing together a lot of things. We're bringing together the story on Numa. We're bringing together some new vocabulary. We're bringing together this lesson on the Olympians. And we're also giving students another conversation piece. And this is another way for teachers who are timid or nervous about bringing in the oral component because you don't feel strong in it. I'm trying to provide a lot of scripted passages that you don't have to be spontaneous and shoot from the hip. I actually use this colloquamur every day when I begin class. I greet them and I ask them about the day of the week. And this is fascinating to me. So our 7 days of the week come from the Roman days of the week. Dies Solis means day of the sun's day. That, of course, became our Sunday. Dies Lunae was the day of the moon's day. That became our Monday. I'm going to jump down here to Dies Saturni was the day of Saturn. Okay, one of the prominent planets within the sky that could be seen at nighttime, but also a deity. And that became our Saturday. These other ones, however, came to us through Norse mythology. So Dies Martis is the day of Mars, Mars Day, but you notice we don't follow Monday with Mars Day. We follow it with Tuesday because Tur was the god of war, the Norse god of war, equivalent to Mars, the Roman god of war. Skipping down to Jovis, Dies Jovis is Jove's day. Well, the equivalent for Jove, god of lightning, for all of you Marvel Avenger fans, is Thor. So Thursday actually came from Thor's day. So this is another way to connect the relevance of classical study to our modern American lives. It also provides us a little bit of conversation where we can practice days a week, but we're also practicing the tenses of essay. Quid est odia, present tense, what is today? Quid erat eri, what was yesterday, imperfect tense. Quid erat cras, what will be tomorrow, future tense. And this is easily reinforced, as being perhaps part of a daily warm-up. Okay. So, other ways to bring in some oral practice. Games. I am big on games, and you will see a lot of these kind of suggestions within the textbook. This one right here you can see is on Roman money. So once you learn your numbers, you can play marketplace. I remember my students my own children, when they were little bitty and they were learning numbers in first and second grade and learning about money, they would have their own little store. And they would get all these pennies and they could go around and they could buy things. Well, this is the same idea, but on a more mature scale. You could set up your own little store within your classroom or practice bartering for a donut or something. I find that food works really well as a motivator for middle school students, teenage students as well. So have a bakery shop and they have to dicker with you on the price of a donut. Nature walks. I absolutely love taking my students for nature walks. Walk around your home, your yard, your school campus, and start to point out in Latin what the names of different trees and flowers and bushes, even rock, fence, right? So you could say something like, hold up a rock and say, est saxum, and then ask, quid est? And the response should be saxum. Counting songs are also great. Card games are fantastic. I believe I have in here, it's also on my blog site, which I believe is going to be rebooted by CAP soon. I have different card games that you can play, such as Go Fish and how to do it in Latin. Great way to practice numbers, great way to practice speaking Latin in a fun, non-intimidating way. And these are great things that you can do too when you have that odd day that needs to be filled, but you don't want to start a new chapter yet, right? Or you have students who have finished early, and so they need something stimulating to do. These can be good reinforcements, and a lot of these you will find within the text series. Okay, this is numbers. I'm going to go ahead and go past this one. That applies to the last one. All right, so then there's also the question, why Latin in the upper school, right? So a lot of you may have used the Latin for Children series, and you feel like your students have received that taste of Latin. They've learned amo, amas, amat. They understand, they've built their vocabulary up. Why do we need to continue? So here are a few of my primary reasons and reasons that you often hear. Let's see if I can get my screen to advance. Okay, I've already talked about building your English skills and how a great many of our English words come from Latin. A further anecdote, I have a student who recently matriculated to NYC Law School. She was actually able to just knock the top off the LSAT with a 99 percentile point, full tuition offer at New York's at NYC Law School. And so when she went there, she called me and she told me, she said, I really believe that the reason I was able to do this was because of my Latin. She says it made the law school vocabulary, it made the vocabulary for the LSAT so much easier. And what's interesting, in fact, is that as she was preparing to declare a major at Rhodes College, where she did her undergraduate studies, she knew she wanted to go to law school, and she asked them, what are the best degrees to study in preparation for law school? And they said classics and political science. Interesting. So building your English skills, building those critical thinking skills is fantastic. Creating a foundation for language and science studies. So I'm going to talk about the science first, since we're on that with the LSAT. So a lot of people are quick to recognize how much Latin builds your vocabulary, but Latin also builds your critical thinking skills. Studies have shown that both the verbal scores and also the nonverbal scores, your quantitative reasoning, particularly on things like SAT and ACT, strongly increase because of the critical thinking you're doing in this highly inflected language. Also the quality of the language. There's a meme that I like that talks about how it's something along the lines of what you learn to say in a modern language study. Where's the bathroom? Can I have a taco? What do you learn in English story or in a Latin language class? What are the kind of things you're translating? Let us go forth and conquer the hostile enemy for the glory of Rome. It's just your language is so much more elevated. So there's that critical reading thinking skills because you're reading on a much higher level than you would in most modern classes and even in the first few years. Creating a foundation for foreign language. I already spoke about Italian. There are 5 Romance languages. Italian is one of them. Also Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian. They're called Romance languages not because they're best spoken with a bottle of wine and candlelight, but because they come from Rome, the language of Rome. So you have a great basis for really learning any other language you want to study. Okay, test scores. I actually just spoke about that one. Better understanding the inheritance of Western civilization. So that's one of the things we're really trying to hone in the Latin Alive series is these connections. You've seen them in the Latin mottos. We also talk about them in stories such as Cincinnatus and Fabius Maximus and connecting those persons to George Washington. There are actual connections there. George Washington used the Fabian tactics in the Second Punic War in his strategies in the Revolutionary War. This book talks about those kind of things because we want students to see that this Latin thing, this Roman people, are actually a part of their heritage, and they had great influence on the formation of our country and even what we see a lot in present day. Study the master of literature in the original language. In classical education, we talk a lot about going ad fontes, to the font, to the spring, to those sources. And we want to study these great masters in different areas. We want to talk about Newton and his 3 laws of motion and what inspired those. We want to talk about Michelangelo and Da Vinci, and we want to study their artworks. We want to even imitate them at some points, right? We want to read Shakespeare. So my argument is, why not go back even further then? Who influenced Shakespeare? Ovid was a huge influence. Let's go back and look at who influenced some of the art by Raphael and Michelangelo and Peter Paul Rubens. It was the works of Virgil's Aeneid. It was the works of Ovid's Metamorphoses. And yes, we can read these things in translation, but as you begin to learn any language, you realize how much can be lost in translation. So thus, when I teach these primary authors, I'm asking students to look at their word choice, their word arrangement, their rhetorical devices, things that just get lost in translation, to better understand how these great writers from Cicero to Newton and beyond, how they use language. And you can only do that, I shouldn't say only, you do that the most thoroughly, you do that the best by looking at the original language in which their documents were written. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the Latin Alive Reader then, and talking about this longing, this last reason for studying Latin. When we open up the Latin Alive Reader, the first reading chapter we look at here is Pro Archia, one of Cicero's more famous legal, going to click that. One of Cicero's more famous legal presentations. And it's a very interesting presentation. He's defending this man, Archias, who is on trial. And it happens that he's one of his teachers. So I tell all of my students as we open up this passage, this is a good model for you. If ever I'm in trouble, you need to come defend me, because that's what Cicero did. He went and he defended his teacher and he helped his teacher out. So, but as he's defending his former teacher, he's talking about what a gift his teacher is, because his teacher has led him to look at the past great writers and use them as a lamp for learning, has used them to cultivate his mind, to sharpen his mind, so that he could become the speaker, the statesman that he is in this day. So even in this verse, we're setting up the idea that what is the benefit of reading these great authors? Is so that they can be used as a lamp, as what Cicero says, the light of literature, to begin to bring light and understanding to even present situations. With each passage here, with each reading here, we also have, you'll see on this right-hand page, an about the author section. So it's important for us that in this last bit, the literature book, that students are only reading the piece of literature, but they're understanding the setting of that literature, who the author was, in what time period did they write, what influenced them to write this, and perhaps what are other connections, results of this work. We do still have the Responde Latina you can see up here, and we also have some things called ad ulteriorem gradum, higher methods of thinking. So they're much further beyond the who, what, why, where, when we saw Latin Alive Book 1, but we're asking to go back and analyze Cicero's arguments for learning. What are his best? What are his worst? And you can do this in English. You can also do some of this in Latin. Okay. So I'm trying to get my screen to change. There we go. Here is just a quick snapshot of the different authors that we have within the Latin Alive Reader. And oftentimes I'm asked by teachers, do you do all of them, or where do you stop, where do you start? Think of it as a banqueting table, a buffet table, and you pick and choose what you think works best in your classroom. I do not do all of them in a year. There is no way to do that. In my 9th grade class, I tend to focus on the medieval, neoclassical, because they're studying modern history in their history and literature classes. In my 10th grade class, I tend to focus on the classical authors because they have gone back to the ancients in their history literature class. I also will kind of think things as they are appropriate to our modern day and era. For example, you can see that I have Francis Bacon on here. There's actually a passage within this book about the sweating sickness, and it's an illness that runs parallel to the bubonic plague. So we actually read through that and talked about it this spring in context of the coronavirus, to just talk about how different peoples dealt with plagues. So this was one that was extremely relevant for this time period. Newton, we have the 3 laws of motion. So that one's also an excellent one to bring in if you want to integrate some science as well. So I think, Joe, we are about done. So I don't know if you want to go on to chat boxes. I'm looking, I think I'm right at 45 minutes. So not too shabby for me, not too shabby.
Karen, that was brilliant. And you're right. I think you made it a little bit more concise compared to the last time we did this.
Oh, okay. I was trying.
It was sharp. It was sharp though. Thank you very much. We've had a few questions come in.
Sure.
That I can ask you now. And then if we, again, to our participants, thank you so much for sticking with us. As you know, we're jumping into Q&A now. And then not quite sure how long this will take, but after Q&A is over, I'll share some resources. Most of the resources that I'm going to share with you, I'll do that via screen sharing. I dropped in through links. So if you scroll up to the top of the chat box, you'll find most of the resources there already. If you need to duck out a little bit early, you can bookmark or save some of the resources and visit them at another time. One question that we had from Julie D that I thought was a great question, and this could branch off in a number of different ways. But really, how can educators teach this in a limited, with limited time? And Julie said she has 45 minutes once a week to teach.
Wow.
It's not a lot of time. And I'm sure there's others that have varying schedules and don't have a consistent routine. So what are some suggestions that you would have in terms of navigating the scheduling and maybe even compressing Latin Alive to fit into a condensed weekly schedule?
Excellent. Okay, so first of all, my heart goes out to you. And please know that you're not alone. It is a very common question, whether I'm doing a webinar such as this one or without fail, whenever I represent CAP at different homeschool conventions or classical conventions. And so I'm going to say two things. First of all, I'm going to say get down on your knees and pray, and also continue to be, Ovid has a wonderful phrase about how the drop hollows out the rock. So without being overly nagging, but being the persistent suppliant and advocate for Latin, continue to talk to administration about why this is important. I say too many classical students, or excuse me, too many classical schools take Latin and say, well, we're going to check off our Latin box and just do it once a week. That is not effective. Go to any school that has a successful language program. Even you go to college, university level, where your students are, 19, 20 years old, supposedly much more mature, and they're still doing their first year language program every single day. So I would continue to advocate for that. And as a Latin teacher, I've been at Grace Academy 18 years. This will be my 19th year. And I have a wonderful support there in the board and in the administration and in the student body and in the parent body. But a lot of that is because I never stopped being the Latin advocate, the Latin ambassador, always showing how and why this is important. But to your other question, what do you do now? What I would suggest is you have to take day one as I'm going to set up and introduce a concept to you. And then these are the different things you're going to need to do throughout the week, and bring them back to me if you have questions. You're obviously not going to do a chapter in a week that way, right? You might do a couple of sections in a week that way. But I would also emphasize to your students the importance of daily vocabulary practice, because you're not going to learn a language looking at it one day in a week. You're not even going to develop a really thorough appreciation understanding of a language. If we even could put aside being able to speak it and read it fluently in one day a week. So God bless you. Keep doing it. I would do again. I'd probably divide chapters either in half or in thirds, and take a few sections at a time. You address those on Monday, set them up with a little bit of modeling, and then you assign sentences and practices to go home. And then you also tell students, I'm available by blank format, whether that's email or a phone number, or perhaps your situation, you can be available at the campus on Wednesday afternoons in case they want to follow up questions with you. And then I would also, and this is for everybody, let me go back to saying what I said about being a Latin advocate. Here are the ways I do this without being a nag. It's more about being a cheerleader and a champion of your cause. So I am constantly communicating with parents by email. Parents, guess what we did today? We just looked at the motto for the state of Arkansas and its seal. Ask your student about the Phrygian cap. And I give a question just like that, right? Ask your student about X, right? Parents, we are right now studying about Francis Bacon's account of the sweating sickness and how it compares to the coronavirus. Ask your students about X, because we all know that our students come home from school. Sweetheart, what did you learn today? Nothing. What did you do? Nothing. I had very talkative kids, but even my own children were like that sometimes too. So give students something to ask at the dinner table. Turn those dinner table conversations into an extension of learning, and let the parents see the valuable connections you're making in Latin class. Do the same thing with your administrator. In fact, actually what I do is I just copy my administrator on those emails. It can be an open CC or a blind CC. And I tell them, I'm doing this, that you know what we're studying in class. But that begins to stir the understanding of, wow, look at all the different things that are connecting to this study.
Thank you, Karen. Another question. This one just popped in from our friends in Brazil. Thank
Okay.
you for joining us today, guys. This one involves teaching Latin in conjunction with another language.
Hmm.
Um, for our friends in Brazil, that other language would be English. Um, However, for many instructors in the States, that language more often than not is Spanish. Occasionally Greek or French, though, or another Romance language. Um, so even if we could scale this back to younger ages and maybe talk about, from the ages of 5, 6, all the way on up to the high school ages, your thoughts on combining Latin with another language, pros, cons,
Right.
potential challenges to overcome.
Good. And I believe in Brazil, you're speaking Portuguese, if I'm remembering correctly, which is another Romance language. So the nice thing is it's not like you're trying to do Mandarin, which is completely different. At least with things like Spanish, Portuguese, French is another one. I know CAP has a French for children program. Those are all Romance languages. They're the same wheelhouse, and you can even use those to strengthen each other by showing relationships and similarities. I have no problem with people teaching multiple languages at the same time. It depends on the teacher, their comfort level, it depends on the student. Just don't expect yourself to go at the same pace, right? So as I said, I studied Latin 7th through 12th grade. When I went to college, I was studying Latin and Greek and Italian all at the same time. So there were days when one got in the way of the other. I remember sitting in front of my Latin instructor who we were talking about classroom methodology, and he asks me to count in Latin, and I start counting in Italian. And for the life of me, I could not get out of Italian mode. So we switched to another subject. So there are days when one is going to come with the other, but you know, I would reward the student in that situation. You're becoming multilingual. This is one of the fun challenges in becoming multilingual. Good for you. You're still processing in multiple languages. So absolutely go for it. Just slow down your pacing or kind of just watch the pacing at what they're able to do. But I think that's fantastic. I say go for it. And if that didn't answer your question, please let me know.
Got a couple thank yous down there. Appreciate the question and the response, Karen. Another one that we had a little bit earlier was in regards to the starting point for Latin Alive. Can you explain how Latin Alive Book 1 serves as an entry text for 6th, 7th, 8th grade students with no previous Latin experience? What about the text allows a learning environment that can have a student just step in with no
Right.
previous background, and not only survive the book but also thrive
Mm-hmm.
and develop an attitude and an appetite where Latin is exciting.
Yes, good question. And I appreciate, Joe, how you said not just thrive, I mean, not just survive, but thrive, because that's what we want. We want them to feel successful, not just not just doggy paddling. Um, and so when Dr. Perrin asked me to create this series, Gail and I talked quite a bit about book one. Book one, it sets the tone, it sets the pace. What are we going to do here? Because we wanted it to be a place where both veterans of Latin for Children, as well as complete and total newbies, could feel comfortable coming in. So it's good for students. Well, let me just back up. Latin Alive Book One assumes no prior knowledge. It's going to cover everything that the Latin for Children series covers. It's not going to assume they know anything. So you can enter that book with no prior knowledge. At the same time, if you're a grammar school student who successfully completed Latin for Children primers A, B, and C, you have a choice. You can go into Latin Alive Book 2 if you're a really strong student. You can also go ahead and take Latin Alive Book 1, and it's not going to be the same. Consider this. In our school, students study in kindergarten, they learn about the founding fathers. They learn about George Washington, right? And Ben Franklin and those founding fathers and the pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock. They learn those things. So why bother teaching it again in 6th grade? And then why bother teaching it again in high school? Because at each level, you can explain more. You can go deeper. You can bring in more critical thinking. You can read more difficult texts. You learn more. So it's the same idea. Even though Latin Alive Book 1 is reviewing first declension nouns and first conjugation verbs and present tense and future tense, we're going deeper in the explanation of a lot of different constructions. And we're providing much more opportunity for reading and reading at a much higher level than in the third, fourth, and fifth grade primer series Latin for Children. So absolutely anybody can start here in Latin Alive Book 1. Galen and I also, knowing that this book would be used by classical Christian schools, homeschool co-ops, parents doing homeschool individually at home, and would thus have a variety of Latin teachers, we did not expect people to come to this book necessarily having had a classics degree or even having taken Latin before. So we tried to put as much explanation as we could comfortably into the student text and even more into the teacher edition so that you as parents have the resources. We also have parents, the Latin Alive DVD series that CAP had us put together. That's a backup they provide for all of their curricula so that you have that access. If you want to see me going through each lesson on DVD, that can be of help too. But you can absolutely start in Book 1 having had no previous Latin.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. I'll ask a question about, we spent a lot of time talking about students' assimilation of the text. How about teachers who are maybe new to the classical education movement and or new to teaching Latin? How can we get teachers assimilated quickly? What resources does the book provide to help teachers assimilate? And maybe resources outside the Latin Alive series as well that you would recommend?
Sure. Well, I think as with any curriculum you're going to teach, you want to be as many steps ahead of the student as you can. I am from Grace Academy is now a K through 12 school. We have about 230, 240 students, somewhere in there. But my first years, it was a very small K through fifth grade homeschool co-op. In fact, I came the first year they called themselves unofficially a school. And so you had, it was a bunch of moms coming together who had different expertise in different backgrounds, but it wasn't uncommon to find out what you were teaching in August, 2 weeks before school started, because it depended upon the year and what the needs were. So I feel that. So as much as possible, though, when you know what your teaching assignment is, you want to start preparing for that. So things I would suggest that you can do, I'm going to start with the classical academic press resources, and then I'll branch out from there. But as I mentioned, we have the DVD series. So I would suggest reading through this book, watching the DVD series, because in the DVD series, I'm not only teaching the material, but I'm also in my head demonstrating how to teach the material. So I'm hopefully giving all of you good ideas on how you can approach that. Another resource is Classical U. Jesse Hake will be talking about it on Friday. Classical U is a wonderful resource that Classical Academic Press has put together specifically for teachers in classical Christian schools, specifically for continuing education. In fact, I believe you're now able to earn continuing education units by taking Classical U courses. I have one on there called Elementary Latin, and it's going to follow more along the lines of the Latin for Children series. But remember what I said, that Latin Alive Book 1 really is a repackaging of a lot of what is of all of the LFC series, plus some bonus material. So you could easily watch even that Classical U course and get some ideas, particularly for the first half of the book. So that's another resource. I would also say that, as I mentioned, I like to integrate history and literature as much as I can. There are some wonderful lectures by other teachers on Roman history, ancient literature in Classical U too. So continue to be that lifelong learner, continue to be learning yourself. Another book that I really enjoy using, that I always encourage teachers to have with them, my book series is a 3-part series, right? Latin Alive Books 1, 2, and 3. And we did that because we want to slow the pacing of a WeLock down, and we want to spread it out over 3 years. However, there's a great book. I'm going to actually type it into the chat section right here, just in case there's a hearing. It's called Introduction to Latin by Susan Shelmerdine. Hold on, Susan Shelmerdine. There we go. Who is a Latin professor. Her sister, Cynthia Shelmerdine, is actually a Greek professor at UT Austin and has written a book called Introduction to Greek. So I've always kind of joked about, I wonder what Thanksgiving looks like with the Shelmerdine household, because you have these different Greek and Latin teachers coming together. But I actually like this book better than WeLock in terms of having one concise place where you can see all of Latin A to Z. And that's also a really great teacher resource for you to have to go through on your own if you would like to do that. Additional sites, I do have the blog site that hopefully will be coming back soon, in which I have a lot of other additional lesson plans and games and strategies and things like that that are also very helpful. But I think that would be probably a great number of resources right there.
Thank you, Karen. And I'll use that to segue into sharing some resources, mostly just some quick navigation on our site.
Great.
For anyone who's interested, feel free to stick around. If not, thank you for joining us today. This has been amazing. Karen, thanks for kicking off our teacher training conference. If there's any questions that pop up during this time, we have about another half an hour allotted. So feel free to drop questions in the chat box.
No, I can talk a whole lot more.
Annette asked for the link to the blog site. I'm sorry, that was private. That's a good question, though. I'm sure other people are wondering. The blog is currently, I guess we could say, under construction. So we're not linking to the blog site right now. We're working on getting that back up soon. So we will. That's not one of the resources that I'm sharing, but great question. And we'll get that linked. Once that is linked, we'll promote that through our usual channels. So there'll be probably a blog about the blog going up on our insights, our classical insights blog space. We'll push it out through our newsletters and social media. So as long as you're following us on one of those channels, you'll be able to gain access to the blog when it's back up. I had a question about a forum. Karen, do you know if we have a Latin forum? We do have a classical U forum. Julie,
Right.
I'm seeing your question right now. We have a classical U forum that's accessed very easily through classical U. One of the main drop downs, you'll get access to the forum. As terms of a Latin specific forum, Karen, we don't host one that I know of. Is there one that you know of?
There is one that I know of. We have in the past, just different stages and different season in CAP's life. So if that's something that you think would be helpful, I would say feel free to write and tell the CAP folk that you think that would be a helpful resource for them. I know they are always looking for new ideas on how they can support those who use their curriculum. I will also say that the ACCS, if you're a member with the Association of Classical Christian Schools, one thing they launched this summer is a forum on their site. And within that forum, they have different subject matters. One of them is classical languages for Greek and Latin. And I'm actually the administrator for that website, or excuse me, for that forum blog or forum chat site. They also have some for mathematics, for administration, for different things like that. So that's one that you might check out. Facebook page too, you can see there are oftentimes, I'm a part of a couple of different Latin teacher groups on Facebook where questions can be asked and curriculum is often discussed, and you'll have a wide variety of opinions there for sure. I'd also say too, I went through the first part of this quickly because I'm notorious for having too many words and running over my time. But if there's anything that I just touched on that you'd like me to go back and talk more in depth about, such as how I approach a reading passage at the end of the book, or how I approach teaching paradigms, or some of the chants that we use, I'm happy to go through those. I was just trying to go fast to make sure I left plenty of time for Q&A at the end.
I see a yes, please for that. Yeah, Karen, you have my blessing to go ahead and do that. I'll just save about five to 10 minutes at the end to share resources and can keep the questions coming as Karen goes through.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, please, definitely. So, Julie, I think I see you. Yes, I do have a ton of games and charts. Most of those are going to come back up with the blog because I had them on the blog site. I'm not sure how much everybody really wants to hear my bad singing voice go through about 15 different chants and charts, but we'll try to get those up as quickly as possible. I will tell you one of the favorites though, and you'll have to back my bad singing voice, but one of the favorites at our school is what we call the Latin hat dance, and it goes the cadence of the Mexican hat dance. Ba-dum, 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 ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum, 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 ba-da-ba-dum, ba-dum. So we use that for the different forms, the imperfect and future of essay. So aram, eras, arat, aramas, aratus, arant, ero, eris, erit, eremis, eritus, erant. These are two tenses of essay, imperfect and future. These are two tenses of essay, imperfect and future. And we dance and twirl around. So that's a lot of times great fun. Another one is Eristum or mini intour, Eristum or mini intour, Eristum or mini intour. These are the passive forms. So I have them for all levels, and a lot of them end up being Christmas carols. So that makes the holiday seasons extremely interesting. But those are just a couple. Were there any other particular ones that somebody had a question on? Oh, you know what? Actually, Julie, now that I think about it, on the ACCS site, and let me see, it's Classical Christian. They have something called the Member Resource Center, and I've actually posted a lot of my chants there. So you might look for that. The MRC, I think they call it the MRC, the Member Resource Center on the ACCS website. Oh, that's, yeah, classicalchristian.org. And look under Latin. I've actually given them a lot of my chants, so you can probably find them there. Okay. Other questions? Then let me ask, just kind of go over reading comprehension and reading passages. There are two approaches that I use for covering a story at the end of a unit, such as the Numa Pompilius one that we saw. One of them is prepared translation, and the other one is sight translation. So a lot of times when we get to those stories, I will give students 1 day, 2 days, depending upon the length, to work through a translation in groups of 2 to 3. I don't find that any productive work comes out of a group of larger than 3. Obviously, that's usually too many distractions. But to have 1 or 2 companions is sometimes helpful to brainstorm ideas off of. Of course, they can do this individually as well. But I'll give them 1 to 2 days to work through a reading on their own and come up with their own English translation. Then we come together for the oral reading. Now, I'm very particular on this part. I ask them as they go through their passage to keep an unfamiliar vocabulary list. That's any word that they don't recognize and it's not in the vocab list provided for that chapter. And I ask them to keep this vocab list so that when we read aloud together, they can have a vocabulary list out, but I make them put their English translation away. And I tell them this because I know that they know how to read English. What we're trying to learn is how to read Latin. So they have to put their English passage away. They can have a vocabulary sheet there, and we read through the passage together. Usually, I will ask a student to read a sentence in Latin. We might lovingly correct some pronunciation if something's really off. And then I ask another student to render that in English. And then I might even ask a third student to render in English in a slightly different way. I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps everybody on their toes, making sure they're paying attention. Another reason is that this is not mathematics. There's not just one absolute right way to translate a passage. You'll see, for example, with present tense, you can translate things as I carry, I am carrying, I do carry. So there are nuances that can be used, and I want them to feel free to do this. So we will go through a passage in that manner, taking it perhaps a sentence at a time. Periodically, I might stop and ask a question, quis est numa, something like that. Or quomoda numa facit, how did Numa do this? sometimes I might save all of those questions for the very end. And then after we've gone through the entire passage slowly like that, I will then assign them for homework to go back and edit, create a final copy that they will then turn in to me. And sometimes even that next day might be when I do the Responde Latine, just depending upon how my class time has gone. This I find is excellent in that they're now looking at the passage 3 different times in their pre-work, in our reading out loud, and in their final copy. And that repetition is very helpful for them gaining comfort and security, confidence. Confidence is what I was looking for them to create confidence within the language itself. It's not about memorizing a story, but if you look at any language, go on Duolingo, for example, you're going to see a lot of repetition of phrases, and that's helping, that repetition helps cement that language, particularly words and grammar and context. Another way that I will approach a reading comprehension passage is sight translation. And I do this after we've done a number of the former ways, but we'll come to a passage, and sometimes I will assign them simply make an unfamiliar vocab list so that they have it handy, but I don't ask them to translate ahead of time. Then what we do is I read it out loud once. And then I read it out loud a second time. And then I might go straight to the Responde Latine questions and just see what they were able to glean having listened with their vocabulary. And then after we've kind of gone through that, and it's not going to be perfectly smooth, and they're not going to have perfect understanding. But let me ask how many of you, when reading a Shakespeare play, understand every word and have complete understanding? I've read a great deal of Shakespeare, and there are places I still get stuck. Or perhaps a new author I've never seen, but he's from a different time period, and I just have a little bit of difficulty with the language. And yet we still understand what's happening and what's going on. So I want students too to not feel that they have to have 100% understanding of every single word in order to read a language. When I go to Italy, I can speak enough Italian to get around, but I don't necessarily pick up every word. But I can speak enough that I can understand, they can understand me, we can work through the communication. So I don't want students to feel like it's perfect or nothing. I want them to begin to see the success of their language and their comprehension. And so I like to reiterate what a good friend of mine says: don't let what you don't know rob you of what you do know. So go through a passage by sight and let them see how they're gaining an understanding. Let them see that they understand that comprehension in general. And then you could go back and you could read through the passage again, this time as you read the Latin sentence, then translating it into English. But I would encourage you to stretch them every now and then. I would also encourage you to give them a fun, relaxing, easy break every now and then. It's not uncommon for me, even in my Latin 3 class, to every now and then pull out my Libellus de Historia and give them a passage. And they can read it very quickly and easily, and there's a big smile on their face. You're like, wow, I remember when I used to struggle with these, and I got it. Like, I just read that. And it's really nice when you get to the peak of a hill to kind of look back on that walk up the hill that you made and realize how far you've come. So every now and then too, not only do we want to stretch them and challenge them, but every now and then we want to give them an easier piece where they can see and feel with confidence the success that they have made, that they are thriving. As we said earlier, they're not just merely surviving Latin, but they're thriving and they have accomplished. And as my students say, hey, we know stuff. Yes, you do. So I would encourage you to vary your levels of challenge as you read throughout the year too. Any questions on that or anything else?
I'll get ready to screen share here. If anyone else has a question, you can throw it in.
Sounds good.
Next couple minutes here. I'll bring this up. All right, those that are familiar with the CAP website may have seen a lot of this that I'm about to go through before. If not, that's fine. Homepage, classicalacademicpress.com. Some navigational help from here. Looking at different product lines under resources, you'll get to our collection hub. We have all our lines here. You'll find Latin Alive down here. And for at any point, any product page that you navigate to on our site, and you'll see this banner at the top. Are you a school? Request evaluation copy. It's the first thing I want to show you. One-click process to get to the evaluation copy form from any product page on the site, not just Latin Alive. And then you'll find our eval copy form here. Some of you may be familiar with this already. If not, it's a great resource. Very simple to fill it out. We've we started to catch up with our eval request forms after COVID. Delayed us a little bit, but we realized at this point that many of these eval requests would be for the 2021-22 school year, and that's fine. We're happy to oblige and have an open dialogue about getting you books ahead of time if you'd like to review them. So that's the eval request form on the Latin Alive pages. And again, this goes for really any product page on the CAP site. You'll see a lifestyle photo or a book photo, upper left-hand corner. This works a lot better on your desktop browser than on mobile, but it does work on mobile as well. Look inside button, clicking on that will open up a PDF sampler from inside the book. We provide a comprehensive sample of the student edition, the teacher's edition, as well as see the chapters. I think this includes a couple of chapters. Karen, if you want to jump in at any point and say something, feel free to as well. And then the DVD sample as well. So that is the product sample. I want to make sure everyone knows that. And then again, for every page, not just Latin Alive, our support tab contains a suggested weekly schedule. That opens up in a separate window and looks like this. It's a very beneficial resource. And I dropped this link in for Latin Alive Book 1 at the top of the chat box. You can find it there. But again, pretty easy to access it. All you have to do is go to product page, scroll down to support, and you'll find it under one of our support tabs. And there's another of other support documents here. Karen, did you want to talk about any of these, any that you think would be helpful to outline?
Sure. Pardon me, I was working on a national Latin exam question. So we're looking at the different support documents. So yeah, again, Wheelock was a common, in fact, I was joking with Joe ahead of time. Wheelock used to be the one that we would always get questions about how do they compare. And so you can see the comparison there between those. Henley is now one that I often get questions on, so I may have to write another article. But this is just kind of going through the differences, how there are some things from Wheelock that I think are really good that I borrowed for Latin Alive, but I just tried to bring it all down to a middle school, high school level. Oh, this is perfect. These declining worksheets and conjugation worksheets, these were just amazing tools that it was kind of one of those necessity is the mother of invention. My apologies, my words are tangled today. And I had students who were just having a really hard time memorizing their declensions or remembering how to conjugate verbs. And I found that having this worksheet where they just did it over repetitively was extremely helpful. But, excuse me, one of my big hints would be have them use colors. Have them write the stem in normal pencil, gray pencil. And then have them add their inflected endings with colored pencil. And that also helps them really identify and understand the difference between the stem of a word and how its ending is inflected. Plus, they love using the colored pencils. So I would definitely make frequent use of that declension and conjugation table. The blog site, again, it's going to be remade, so kind of keep a hold on that. The Roman timeline outline, that's just going through an outline of what we're looking at in terms of history in these books. And I don't know about you, but I love history. So I love showing timelines and showing students where in the world and when in the time of the world things are happening and taking place. And then this syllabification and accent, honestly, that's at the beginning of every single Latin Alive book, save the reader. So I don't know that that's necessarily a need, but it's nice to know that it's right here.
What that looks like. Yeah, thanks for going over those, Karen. Anything else? Support tabs, I think we pretty much covered everything. And you can find this is almost a carbon copy for Latin Alive, book 2 and book 3 as well, in terms of what support documents you can expect to see there.
Do you mind if I jump in on this NLE question?
Yeah, go for it. I'll
Because
stop
this
my.
is a question I often get too. Someone asked how Latin Alive prepares for the National Latin exam. And I would say that the two big things are, one, we do a lot of history and culture here, right? So National Latin exam will bring a lot of history and culture questions into their exam. So if you're going to do that, I would encourage you to make sure you download the syllabus off of their website and know what kind of things will be included on that exam. Do not, please, 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 do not use the National Latin exam as the standardized test for evaluating your Latin program, because it's not good for that. It's a nice, fun competition, but the history and culture can really throw things off. That said, if you look at the syllabus, you can use Latin Alive to kind of hone in on some of those things. Also, Latin Alive series does provide at each unit reading a multiple choice question format reading comprehension section. And I do that because students who don't see multiple choice a lot, they sometimes then have a harder problem with a multiple choice test, not because they don't know the information, but they're not used to processing things that way. So our multiple choice reading comprehension questions are intentionally structured to look not only like the National Latin exam, but as the students progress, they begin to look like questions you might see on the AP Latin exam as well. So that I would say would be the extent of that.
And then there was one other comparison question. I don't know if you saw it. Karen was just dropped in. Latin in the Christian Trivium.
Yes, I saw that one when it first came out, and I was able to speak with the author, lovely lady. Latin for the Christian Trivium reminds me so much of Ecce Romani, which is a book that I was raised on and actually taught in my early years when I taught in a public school. And it struck me as the Christianized version of an Ecce Romani. They didn't, last I saw, and please understand, I have not looked at it in years, so it may have changed, but it was wanting to keep it purely Christian focused and did not want to get into some of the mythology and the deities. And I will say that as a Christian woman, as a Christian mother, that was something I struggled with. These are false gods. And how much attention do I want to give to false gods and their wild escapades? But here's the other side of that coin, is that this culture that was Rome, including its religious culture, has had a profound influence on our modern American culture, on our literature. You just saw it in the days of the week. If I go to an art gallery, I've told my students, if you know Ovid's Metamorphoses, Virgil's Aeneid, and the Bible, you can walk into any art gallery and understand what's going on. So there's also a high level of allusions in works like Shakespeare and other authors to the Greco-Roman religion. So I always teach them as false gods. We always look at the stories and the worldview with them. But that would be one difference, is that I think Latin Alive embraces the Greco-Roman culture, not saying that we approve of everything, but at least being honest about who they are and what they are and what positives we can take from that and what are the negatives as well. And I think that's what we have to do with history. We have to look at history and learn from the positives and learn from the negatives and just have honest conversations about them. So that would be that's my first thoughts on that comparison.
Thanks, Karen. I'll wrap us up now as we're getting closer to noon. A couple quick notes for everyone. All schools receive 20% off and free shipping on any order of 20 items or more. Just a standard Classical Academic Press policy we want to make sure that you're aware of. The session with Karen has been recorded. It'll be sent to the email address that you provided for registration. And we will also be creating kind of a recording landing page or a hub after the teacher training conference is over. You'll be able to access any of the recordings during the conference, even if you didn't register for a particular session. And then the last item to note, and I'll throw this in the chat box, our team is going to be available throughout the conference to answer any additional questions that you may have, whether it's logistics such as shipping, pricing, or specific questions about Latin Alive or another curricula line. I'm going to drop in we have a separate Zoom ID, and the link is in there at the bottom of the chat box. So you can copy and paste that link into your browser, access it at any time. Monday through Friday, we'll have kind of our virtual booth open at various times with different sales team members there to answer your questions. So Karen, on behalf of everyone here, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to chat with you and listen to not only your expertise, but also your enthusiasm and joy for the Latin language. Thank you for doing what you do. Any comments from you to wrap us up today, Karen?
Oh, no, just thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all for doing what you're doing, because I know it's a labor of love. And I also know that it's a commitment on your part to seek the best way to educate these sweet children that God has entrusted to you. So just blessings upon you, and many thanks. You all have my eternal gratitude for partnering with me in this journey to share Latin with the world.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Final note from me, Lower School Latin webinar, should mention, is this afternoon at 2 o'clock with Dr. Christopher Perrin. We'll be covering primarily the Latin for Children series, but also going into Song School Latin as well. So the grade 1 through 6 range will be touched upon by the Dr. Christopher Perrin this afternoon. Looking forward to that. You can still register for that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed rest of your Monday. Great start to the week, and hope to see you in another session. Thanks all. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.